It really is. You know, and what you're doing, you're going to be facing, I guess, dealing with a lot of regulatory agencies, both on a federal level, state level, and local level. How do you navigate that? And this is really for anybody. Well, what pattern, when do you start the process? Because it looks like it's going to be there would be a challenge.
So I'm sure multiple people will have comments, but I think the key is you start early. You start now. We've already started. I think from a vehicle and operation standpoint, it's really important to get the whole FAA involved and to get a consistent outcome. We saw that with drone as well, when eventually the FAA basically put in place a structure that it was able to pull across all of the vehicle, the flight standards operations side, and air traffic to help move that forward. We need to do that at the outset here to make sure that we have consistent regulation across those and we don't overburden any individual part of the system. And then we need to be involved in communities. That's why with Uber, you know, we've had outreach to Los Angeles, to Dallas-Fort Worth, areas where we can start the conversation, understand the community needs, make sure that we're reacting to those. The last thing that we need is to have a patchwork of requirements across the country. We really need to have some consistency that allows us to execute in a scaled kind of way with the same vehicles, the same sort of operational models, tailored locally with vertiport locations and things like that to manage noise, privacy, and other concerns, but a consistent overall model from a regulatory standpoint as well as from an operational standpoint.
If I may build on Mr. Thacker's last point, that this is a golden opportunity for the country that we can actually do this together in a very concerted and systematic manner. We don't have to repeat the same way, as you mentioned, the patch jobs that we did 60, 70 years ago. So I think in the vehicle certification side, industry has been working really hard to get there, and I'm very optimistic that industry partners will get there. And from government perspective, FAA and NASA have been working really well together to enable this new capability. So I think, again, my point is this is one chance that we can actually design the system right, and everybody, public and private, working together to come up with a robust system as best as we can design and from the get-go. So I think we're all working together. We're just representing very small segment of community, but I can assure you that a lot of entities are working together in this field.
I would add that, you know, you can never start speaking to regulators early enough when it comes to aviation, in the sense because you're always pushing the envelope and you're all bringing technology for which they don't necessarily have expertise in-house. And so that's one of the foremost reasons for starting early. I think in this case, you know, as I said earlier, I see a cable model for air traffic control services, just because it's just not practical in my view to have the FAA doing air traffic management inside urban areas of sections. So I think there's going to be a new sense for certification, for certifying the companies and the entities that are doing the air traffic management, which we haven't had to do before because that was all internal to the FAA. So I think there's going to be need for regulations and processes for making sure that the folks who are actually managing the traffic are doing so in the way that you'd like them to. So that's one area which I think is slightly different than we've had before in aviation, where you know, it was just about the vehicles and the operators, but not about air traffic control. Now we'll have to be able to do certification around all each, and we'll have to make it nimble. You know, one of the things about aviation is we have very rigorous standards, and implicitly, and in some cases explicitly, we get some release on liability. Some of those standards are quite onerous and take a long time, and if we don't want to throttle the growth in this industry, we'll have to figure out a model that is more nimble with regards to certification, and that's something that I think would require some legislation at some point.
I think that's where Congress comes in, because we each represent different constituencies, and we'll have a lot of concerns that both positive and negative. What about other countries? Technology-wise, it looks like that would be an area that you could collaborate with. Are you doing any of that with other nations?
I will say that from a regulatory perspective, we've had a lot of cooperation from other international civil aviation authorities, particularly EASA. So the new Part 23 Amendment 64 is harmonized with CS 23 Amendment 5. So that is very beneficial for the industry at large.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about regulations. I was mainly thinking about technology-wise. I know as I get around my district, a lot of the machinery comes from Germany, other countries. Is this something that you could possibly get with other nations on to look at?
So NASA is a member of 26 member states organization called International Forum for Aviation Research. So NASA was a founding member along with the German Aerospace Agency some 10 years ago when we formed this. The members are all government-backed or sponsored research organizations. So we're working to find out what the pre-competitive but common technologies that we can raise the water level together, and also harmonizing some of the technologies or standard possibly. So we're working with them, and also we're working heavily with FAA, which represents United States to the International Civil Aviation Organization, as Ms. Dietrich mentioned. So a lot of work needs to be done, and I think you're pointing out a very important point. Still, a lot needs to be done, but I think the necessary parties are working together.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Norman.